Oh, time wears a war, time wears a war, and winna let us be. It stole the wild rose frae your cheek, and the blithe blank frae me.
It's difficult to conceive that Lambhill would have emerged when it did as a place without the building of the Forth Clyde Canal. The section of the canal running through Lambhill was constructed between 1768 and 1776 and is part of the original main line running from Grangemouth to Stockingfield on the outskirts of Maryhill. The traffic to Glasgow was handled at Stockingfield until pressure and demands by the city's merchant houses to bring the canal directly to the city centre forced a new branch to be cut through to Hamilton Hill. And there, on the site of 100 Acre Hill, which was on the northern boundary of the city at that time, built Port Dundas, Glasgow's inland port, terminus and headquarters of the Glasgow branch Forth Clyde Canal Company. In 1790, the canal finally reached Bowling, linking the Firth of Forth and the Firth of Clyde, allowing passage for barges and seafaring boats across the Scottish lowlands. Three years later, a navigable link with the Monkland Canal was completed. You could navigate from Coatbridge right through to Glasgow. This was the main channel for the transportation of raw materials and products that came from the emerging industries of iron smelting and coal mining in the Coatbridge area. The canal, a vital artery of supply to the mines, factories and forges that fuelled the start of the Industrial Revolution in Scotland. Port Dundas became an industrial centre with textile mills, chemical works, granaries, distilleries, glassworks, iron foundries, power stations and engineering works, all operating in the area. And it wasn't just limited to the transportation of industrial freight. In the early 19th century, travel between Glasgow and Edinburgh was by stagecoach. Pulled by teams of horses, the journey could take up to 14 hours. The Canal Company recognised a need for a reliable, faster and affordable alternative to the stagecoach, and wished to capitalise on it. Though it wasn't until the completion of the Edinburgh and Glasgow Union Canal that they had the means for an intercity passenger service, and ran passenger boats to destinations along the course of the canal. Resting at the cross where Balmore Road passes over the canal, the old stables buildings and adjacent cottages have borne witness to the comings and goings of Lambhill life since industrial use of the canal began. These are the oldest surviving buildings of the area's industrial past. Historical landmarks, which after so many years of neglect have now been restored to provide a focal point for Lambhill activity, as a purpose-built community and environmental facility. Lambhill Stables was built around 1828 as one of a group of stable blocks stationed between Stockingfield Junction in Glasgow and Lock 16, Camelon, near Falkirk.
I have been a wild drover for many a year, and have spent all me money on whiskey and beer.
Built to a standard Forth Clyde Canal Company's design, another 3 identical buildings are situated at Glasgow Bridge, just outside Kirkintilloch. One at Twecker and another at Craigmarloch. A typically Georgian building, built on 2 stories, with its symmetrical facade, hipped roof main block and an advanced pedimented central bay. Both elegant and practical, the appearance of these buildings echoes the more classical treatment accorded to the canal headquarters at Port Dundas. These stables buildings were built every 4 miles or so along the canal to provide a fresh relay of horses to power the fast canal boats of the prestigious Swift Boat passenger service. The Swift boats were the first intercity passenger service to travel daily between Edinburgh and Glasgow throughout the 1830s, before the advent of the railways. This section was for use as dwellings for the stables manager and his family. Living room and bedrooms were upstairs, and below there was a stone-floored washhouse and kitchen area. As was the case with some of the other stables blocks, the ground floor rooms could have functioned as a waiting area for passengers when the canal company ran a night service. This section of the stables building contained the horse stalls on the ground floor. It's no wonder why local people called them horse barracks, as they housed 8 heavy work horses, which worked in teams to haul the passenger boats. Hard driven, with military discipline, regular like clockwork. It would have been some task keeping the stables clean, but mucking out the stalls with buckets of water and heavy brushes was made more effective by the ramped floor and drainage channel. In those days, as stables went, the facilities here were considered more than adequate. The horses were well groomed, well fed, and got plenty of exercise. Directly above the stables was the hayloft, always well stocked with animal feed and bales of straw, providing good heat insulation during the cold nights. At the arrival of the Swift boat from Port Dundas, the first team of horses would be unharnessed from the boat and driven up the path to the stables, whilst the replacement team of fresh horses were waiting on standby to take up the reins. The Swift boats could then resume their journey with the minimum of fuss and time lost at changeover. The horses would then wait at the stables for the return service from Glasgow Bridge to take the boats back to Port Dundas. Each team operated like this on their own stretch of the canal 4 times a day. This small building to the right of the stable manager's quarters was originally used as a utility store and workshop. At Lambhill, it was also used as a coal bunker. As was the standard for those times, the lavatory was a primitive facility out at the back. These cottages may predate the stables buildings, built when the first phase of the canal was completed between 1768 and 1777. The bridge keeper's main duty was to open the Bascule Bridge so that canal boats with tall sailing masts and funnels could pass through. The bridge required 2 people to operate, and while the bridge keeper opened one side, his assistant, crew member or horse tracker had to open the other. The Bascule Bridge operated on this part of the canal from 1790 up until 1930. The name Bascule is from the French term meaning seesaw or balance. This double-leafed bridge was operated by a system of counterweights and gears which enabled each leaf to be raised and lowered quite easily by hand. In its day, Lambhill Bridge was a frequent meeting point for locals, catching up for a chat and enjoying a pleasant afternoon along the canal bank. A high point of many summer evenings was opening the bridge for the Gypsy Queen, which always managed to cause quite a stir as she passed through the village of Lambhill. Over the centuries, as the canal changed ownership, many administrative documents and logs have been lost, leaving important leads a little threadbare in some areas for researchers to follow. Occasionally, new insight is gained through other avenues, from local connections, which help to piece together the story of everyday canal operations. Annie Doyle made an interesting discovery when researching her family tree.
I have documents, I have census records actually in here as well, and then as I worked my way back through the generations, I ended up in Balquidder near Perth with Malcolm Fisher, who had a son Daniel Fisher. It's my great grandfather. So Daniel Fisher came down from Balquidder. They had no work up there at all. We found that Daniel moved here in 1841. He was an agricultural labourer in Maryhill. But in 1851 he became the canal drawbridge keeper. He was 1790 and died in 1880 at the bridge. That was his job, and this is where he lived. Stayed for 40 years.
In the light of increased weight on road traffic, the Bascule Bridge at Lambhill was replaced by an electrically powered steel span. The bridge was pivoted on one side, being operated from the control cabin by the bridge keeper. It ceased operating when the canal closed in 1963. banksman was a multi-skilled individual who maintained the banks of the canals. He walked along the canal daily, clearing debris, checking for any potential breaches and rebuilding as necessary. He maintained the towpaths and cleared the undergrowth and kept the hedges trimmed. And as I gaze upon it, let me pause and think. How many people in Glasgow of its water drink? That's conveyed to them in pipes from its placid lake, and are glad to get its water, their thirst to slake. So wrote the poet and performance artist William McGonagall about Loch Katrine. And McGonagall, as with Glaswegians of that time, would be indebted, as indeed we are today, to the city fathers who built the Loch Katrine water system. A bold response to a desperate humanitarian need for clean drinking water and new urban sanitary standards. Amid an epidemic of typhoid and cholera that had returned to ravage communities in the city for the third time that century, claiming 3,000 lives in the Glasgow area alone in 1832. After 2 decades of campaigning, construction of the scheme started in 1855. Working its way through the Scottish hillside, from the Trossachs via 35 miles of aqueducts and pipes until finally reaching Glasgow. The water table of Loch Katrine Reservoir can be drawn down a maximum of 7 feet, as it's piped to the Milngavie Water Treatment Works, situated almost 400 feet above sea level. The gravitational flow is sufficient to provide adequate water pressure and can deliver up to 50 million gallons a day. Glasgow's new water supply was officially opened by Queen Victoria in 1859. The social and health benefits of the scheme became effective almost instantly, and by 1866, typhoid and cholera had virtually been eradicated from the city. The success of the project was commemorated by the installation of the Stuart Memorial Fountain in Kelvin Grove Park in 1872. At Lambhill, the Loch Katrine waterworks had to cross under the line of the canal. Below the house on the canal bank are the inspection doors that led to the siphons for the main supply pipes from Mugdock Reservoir. The siphon allows the water to cross the canal below the level of the main pipe, returning to its original level on the other side. When the scheme was enlarged in the 1880s, a second siphon was built with its own inspection door. The works are currently operated by Scottish Water. By the 1840s, horse-drawn passenger boats were being phased out on the canal, as steam locomotives became the preferred mode of travel over long distance between cities. When the canal passed into the hands of the Caledonian Railway, its new owners put the stables buildings out to lease as rented accommodation and storage workshop facilities for local businesses. In 1894, George Dunlop, a missionary from Maryhill, rented the premises for an initial yearly rent of £5, establishing the Lambhill United Presbyterian Mission. Soon the canal bank was filled with the sound of churchgoers, and the mission set to the task of integrating into everyday life at Lambhill, providing regular services of worship, setting up gospel meeting groups and a Sunday school for local people. Many of them the families of miners who worked in the nearby coal mines. For the Lambhill Iron Foundry, they set up a Foundry Boys Instruction Centre, providing religious instruction for the young apprentices. Through subletting, they were able to provide conference space for meetings of local organisations such as the Cadder Cooperative Society, School Board and regular parliamentary surgeries. Lambhill United Presbyterian Mission had firmly established the stables not only as a place of religious instruction and worship, but as a community resource as well. They even set up a small library and reading room. Mission records show an average attendance of 100 people at congregations in 1897. It was noted that there were 140 children on the roll, 60 boys and 80 girls. With all this varied activity, and with so many people using the buildings at one time, you might wonder how they managed for space. Resilient as they were, they had hopes to increase the height of the roof. But there was no need. After 13 years at the stables, the mission moved to new premises in Crawford Street, as Knapdale Street was known then in 1907. And as the Lambhill Evangelical Church, they are still going strong to this day. The Morrows were the last family to live in the old stables building. They first came there in 1908 when their grandfather was the manager of the ill-fated pit number 15 in Cadder.
See up the stair in the house, you've not the stair, and the first room you had on your left hand side was a big sitting room, it was a big room.
Big bed.
The opposite end, we had your lobby and a window there that looked right up to the camp cells. That end there was a big bedroom, it was a very large room. In the middle was a small bedroom, right? The stair was up here. Beneath that, you had a small bedroom in there. Next to that, you had a big kitchen. It was the size of this that way anyway, and maybe a wee bit bigger that way. You'll see when you go in. And then next to that, there was a big workshop, but we called it the cellar.
Now in the cellar, the coal mine would come in, the coal was locked and dropped in a corner. There was rafters where my father used to hang her bicycles up in the rafters. I've actually got a medal that my father got for cycling. There you go. He was in the cycling club with the Glasgow Corporation, and the cycling club used to meet in our big room, and they would all come, and there was all sorts of bicycles all lined up outside, even tandems, you know, one for the two people in it. It was brilliant, and I used to love it because I was a wee girl, and so we going out the door, they would slip you a shilling or a sixpence, and this was brilliant. Next door to that was the wash house, where you done all the washing, but there was no hot water. You had to fill everything up with the cold water, wait till it boiled, and then do the washing in that, scrub it in a scrubbing board and hang it outside. There was no electricity either. No electricity, we had oil lamps, which meant you to get up in the morning, well it was either my dad or my mum, go down in the morning, light the fire before you could even make your breakfast. Do you imagine anybody doing that today? No way. You think just to go and switch on a wee switch. There's the bedrooms upstairs, and the big room at the end was the chaise. That was a visitor's. It was always kept very posh with a big carpet in the floor, and the polished wooden bit round about and the carpet in the middle. And you just went in there when you had visitors or somebody had died or a christening or something like that. You know, that was it. That was the big room.
So it was actually a big house, and the hall had actually nothing to do with us.
No.
They just kept it completely as a storeroom. I remember it being empty one time, going in the side of the stage, and then they fill up again with all this sheet dip and whatever it was.
Before my time, the hall was hired out at weekends to the Hibernians for dances and things like that.
That's right.
That was before my time.
We always called it the hall.
But we always called it the hall.
It was known to that was the hall.
That was the
and
hall.
Our house and the hall was next door. And all the time I lived there, it was used for storing chemicals.
We used to get told stories. Now, I do not know if it's true or not, that it had been used as a police station at one time.
Oh, it was the hall that was seemingly used as a police station.
It had been used as a police station, and it had also been used at one time as a school.
The rest of my father grew vegetables. He was not a great believer in growing flowers.
The ground is really good for to grow things in. You never hardly bought any vegetables at all. You just dug them out in the garden, went in, washed them and made your dinner. That's great. It was fantastic. We bought nothing. We had potatoes, you name it, we had it out there. Gooseberry bushes, red currant bushes. The gooseberries just grew like weeds. My mother and my auntie made a lot of jam. And then behind that there was a cow park, a big field full of cows. So all you used to do in the summer, you didn't need to go near a garden centre, you just went up the cow park with a bucket and fertilised the garden, and everything grew fantastically. It was nothing for when we had the house to get up in the morning and the door was not locked, and we had a big cow in the house, and my father would have to chase the cow out, and he used to get angry at the door being left open.
Out to where the bridgeman's garden was. And my father, when I was a kid, I don't know when they were younger, it might have been different, half of it, about a third of it was taken up with hens, free range hens.
I did the garden during the war. That was before the hens came. And the hens had to be taken away because we found a great big rat. And we were not having a big rat.
The hens should never have been.
So the hens had to go.
At that time the canal was lovely. They had wee boats used to go up, fishing boats would come up, and many a time the fishing boats stopped at the bridge, and you'd go down there with a bucket and they would fill it up with, it was usually herring. So we lived for ages in herring after that, either done an oatmeal or all sorts of different ways. We done that with the herring. The horses would come down, then you saw them getting hay and stopping a good bit, and then there was always a Gypsy Queen. Gypsy Queen used to come up and people were dancing and singing, and girls used to come from the town someplace, and they used to twiddle their wilkies and do daft things, and people used to throw them off money. But we weren't allowed to do anything like that. We used to sit and stand and watch them.
They were the most interesting things going through the canal.
The puffer saving through, you know, like Barra Handy.
Aye. The moonlight, the starlight, and the pick, the kelp, the Arab, the Egyptian, the haze with the daylight, the starlight, and the 98-ton boats with funnel at the back, coal-fired.
See, we had
A lot of them built along the bank in Kirkletilloch, and they were lodged broadside on into the canal.
Aye.
And later on, when I was about 14, we still got the puffers through, not long before the canal closed. And I remember they tied up, if they didn't want to go through the bridge at the canal, they tied up at Dunn's back here. They tied up there, and we'd go down, and they got me Marlon's pub for a few pints. And when he come back, you get half a crown, and half a crown's a hell of a lot of money to us when we were kids. And I went round them in 1949, something like that.
And they knocked all the walls, the inside walls and everything in it, I know. And the bit that got me, when they, this is a wee thing I've never even told my sister. Between the upstairs and the downstairs, there was a wee space, and there was a bit where there was a wee hole you could hide things in. And I had a boyfriend at that time in the army, and I used to write to him, and he would write to me, and I had all these letters tied up with ribbon, and I hid them in that hole. And I often wonder if these people that opened up the garage ever found them. They must have. They must have. So dear note where they are. Just for somebody called his name. But amazing to read the daft things, you know, when you were 18. Things to do out there.
The site was recognised by the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Scotland in their photographic survey of 2001.
Oh, I'll roll and I'll give over, while rolling I'll give on, and rain
sort of post-industrial era we now live in, and there is still a population, but it's been in many ways denuded of its original purpose for being here, and part of the whole mission is to bring back occupational and meaning opportunities for the people that live here that have been in many respects on the scrap heap for a couple of generations. Over the past 6 years we have been pulling a project together between the Lambhill Community Council and Lambhill Stables, and that has the aim and vision of restoring the stables as a landmark facility and creating a base for activities in the communities surrounding the stables, to create opportunities for local people through education, training, to lead to employment, using old skills in a modern context. The actual activities that will take place in the building will range from meeting rooms for different groups, activities coming out of youth services, a lot of local history and heritage projects which will have exhibitions. Some organisations will be based here, hopefully, particularly along the lines of the outdoor education for young people. So for the local people it will be a hub where they can drop in and get involved in a whole variety of activities.
After the initial refurbishment of the stables building has been completed, the profile of the canal bank will be transformed by the building of a new visitor centre, with cafe and exhibition space providing an attractive stopping off point for local people and canal users alike. A prominent feature of the new build will be an observation tower where visitors can survey the surrounding area 360 degrees from a gallery. Looking out over the canal and the Possel Marsh Nature Reserve, with scenic views of the Campsies in the distance. Part of the building's purpose is to demonstrate renewable technologies, incorporating state-of-the-art eco-friendly heating and power systems as an alternative to those derived from conventional fossil fuels.
The building itself will be heavily insulated so that the use of energy to heat it and so on will be at a minimum.
The combined effect is to maintain a building that produces as much energy as it consumes and creates no direct greenhouse gases. And as a result, according to some in the scientific community, does not contribute to global warming.
Ultimately, it's using as little energy as possible to heat, that if you are properly insulated, you keep that heat in, so it's all down to the quality of your insulation.
To the keen-eyed, as you coast the topography of the area around Lambhill, you quickly become aware of a connecting theme of historical references that point to the production of industrial energy and evolving methods of transport. They are there in the fields and marshlands of disused coal and iron ore pits. There, on the waterway, where once the widespread use of horsepower, carrying raw materials and passengers across the central belt of Scotland, was replaced by steam and then diesel, before the canal itself was superseded by rail and then the motorways. And where the cycle of an archaic fuel source begins. In the Possil Loch, where bogland mosses thrive in the early stages of forming peat. And the pylons that dominate the skyline, and electric substation transforming raw power to feed the insatiable needs and demands of the city of Glasgow. It is fitting then that the stables will function to inform each new generation about the importance of alternative sources of energy. A working testimony to what can be achieved by harnessing the unlimited supply of cleaner, more efficient and cheaper fuel, generated simply and gracefully by the power of Mother Nature. But the real power of a place is in its people, the community themselves, who have rallied together to preserve such an iconic building as the stables and save it from ruin. And in doing so have preserved a part of their own history and culture, never to be lost. And will prove Lambhill Stables to be a cutting-edge social and environmental developer for the 21st century. When the canal was first opened, it was deeper than the Clyde, and there was occasion when vessels with a large draft had to use it, rather than the river, to reach Glasgow. In those days, the canal company ran 2 track boats, which made 3 journeys a week, carrying passengers and cargo from the River Clyde to the River Forth. Customers were charged by tonnage, but it was a complex system and tedious to administer. And so it was sought to provide a dedicated passenger service that would be easy to regulate. Three vessels were introduced: the Margaret, the Charlotte and the Star, built at the Canal Company's boatyard at Top Hill, Falkirk in 1809. Passengers were well looked after. The Canal Company proudly advertised, "As no expense has been spared to fit up these boats in an elegant, convenient and most comfortable manner, it is hoped that they will meet with due encouragement." And if that whetted your appetite, breakfast and dinner to be had on board whilst on the passage. They even had a stove to keep warm in the evenings. The best cabin's fare was 4 shillings, but you could travel in the second cabin for half the price. Makes this the cheapest and most pleasant way of travelling between Glasgow and Edinburgh. The service proved a serious competitor to the stagecoach, whose journey was often uncomfortable, hampered by rough sections of road, clogged up with mud in the rain. They left Port Dundas, Glasgow, and Loch 16, Camelon, every lawful day. These boats were drawn by 2 horses travelling at a rather leisurely pace, taking nearly 6 hours to complete the journey. In 1816, following their use on the Paisley Canal, narrow or packet boats were put to the Forth and Clyde. 70 foot long and built to carry 100 passengers, travelling at a sedate 4.5 miles per hour, they became quite popular with travellers sailing for pleasure, taking the scenic route. And so it remained, until 1822 and the opening of the Union Canal. When getting the passenger boat service to Edinburgh from Glasgow, passengers would go only part of the distance. They'd start from Port Dundas and travel a total of 24.5 miles through 4 lochs to Loch 16 at Portdowney, in the village of Camelon, just outside Falkirk. And there they would make the connection onto the Union Canal. In the next half-mile section were 11 lochs, which the passengers could avoid by taking the coach to the waiting boats on the Union Canal. Which would then carry them level on the 31.5 miles journey to the terminus at Port Hopetoun. Although pioneering experiments in using steam to power vessels on the canal took place as early as 1789, they were abandoned because of fears that the churning water and wake from the paddle wheel would damage the canal bank. The conventional system of horsepower remaining in use for some time to come. The canal was cut to follow the contour of the land. The bank opposite the towpath, for the most part, is made up from the natural landscape, with no protective masonry wall. They realised quite early on that with frequent use, the wooden hulls of their boats began to show signs of wear and tear as they scraped against the undergrowth that would sometimes grow unnoticed on certain parts of the canal bank before being discovered and cropped back by the banksmen. They needed their hulls to be made of a more durable material. In 1816, keen to utilise new technology which it had adapted earlier in the building of the paddle steamer Charlotte Dundas, the canal company authorised the development of a new kind of passenger boat to be made of plate iron. 2 years later, Thomas Wilson was hired as the shipwright. The design called for iron sectionals to be riveted together with covering plates. The plating had to be hammered out of puddled iron, as no iron rolling mills existed at the time. 65 feet long and 12.5 feet wide, weighing only 12 tons, the Vulcan was launched on the bank of the Monkland Canal at Fasken, Airdrie, in May 1819, making her the first iron-hulled boat to sail in Scotland, laying the foundation for the use of iron plates and hull design of iron vessels for shipbuilding throughout the world for many years to come. Originally a wagonway, powered by horses on a single rail track, the Monkland and Kirkintilloch Railway extended from the Monkland coalfield to the Forth Clyde Canal near Kirkintilloch. Its main function was intended to be the transportation of coal and iron ore, but in October 1826 it became the second railway in Scotland after the Kilmarnock and Troon Railway to be authorised to carry public goods and passengers. In 1831, 2 steam locomotives were brought into service, both built by Murdoch and Aitken of Glasgow, the first to be assembled in the city. Then, amid tremendous jubilation, the first railway line into Glasgow by the Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway opened to passenger traffic in September 1831. Its main financer was Charles Tennant and Company of St Rolloch's Chemical Works, and it is reported that at the celebration dinner held in Glasgow the same evening, the bold prophecy was made that ere long would it be possible to travel by rail to Edinburgh in a couple of hours and to London in no more than 20. To the Canal Company, the writing was on the wall. Realising that this new mode of transport would pose a serious threat to trade, every measure was taken to provide a more competitive service on the canal and give the railways a run for their money. And looming on the horizon, the Caledonian Railway, with its vision to link local railways to the network in England and beyond. Experiments with the first light passage boats had been going since 1821, but on November the 10th, 1830, a new style passenger boat, the Swift, was introduced. The number of stages, or horse barracks as they were sometimes called, were increased to provide a relay of fresh horses every 3 miles or so, to power the Swift and the rest of the fleet of the new passenger boats. This unique wooden boat, with its twin hulls and light construction, set a new record for the journey from Port Dundas to Port Downey in 3.5 hours. The Swift was superseded by the iron-hulled Rapid, a craft of more formidable design, more suited to be hauled at fast speed and advertised as knocking half an hour off the previous journey time of the Swift. The Rapid was 68 feet long and 5.5 feet broad, with a thin iron hull that weighed less than 1 3/4 tons. It seated 70 passengers, and when at rest, it had a draft of only 8 inches. When in rapid motion, fully laden, its draft was only 16 3/4 inches in the water. To save weight, the cabin and steerage accommodation was covered in a stretched oiled canvas over curved ribs, with spaces left for windows. There was also open seating in the bows and baggage accommodation under the bow and stern decks. On the day of the launch, so high rose enthusiasm that the bairns, who mustered numerously, carried the boat shoulder high to the starting lock. Even though the boats were rapids, the name of Swift Boat stuck, and the passenger service was known as that from then on. The way in which Swift boats were operated on the canal is that horses were driven hard to pull the boats up to speed, and as the drag on the boat from the water reduced, the horses were able to sustain momentum at an even canter. It was said they could achieve about 10 miles an hour on a good stretch. By 1835, 3 horses were employed to each boat, completing the journey from Glasgow to Edinburgh in 6.5 hours, a distance of 53 miles. (1832) signalled the end of the Canal Company's monopoly over the passenger boat service. Flyboats owned by the likes of the Glasgow and Edinburgh Shipping Co. dispatched from Sanderson's Wharf and Port Dundas alongside the Canal Company's swift boats. Competition for trade became fierce, reduced fares ensuing a price war. The Canal Company's own swift boats had priority over other craft to the extent that they were allowed to slash the tow ropes of any barge that got in their way. Passenger services ran 4 times a day and even included an overnight sleeper service known as the Hoolets. At first, there were regular races between the night services of passenger boat companies, of swift boats and flyboats. But after complaints about injuries to passengers, the times of departure were altered to allow each company to leave the port at a different time. The number of passengers reached about 200,000 a year throughout the 1830s, but the linking of Glasgow and Edinburgh by railway in 1842 brought the era of horse-powered swift boats on the Forth Clyde Canal to a final close. Steam power had arrived in full force, both on land and sea, and as the industrial use of the canal transferred to rail, ownership of the waterway passed into the hands of a company the canal owners had strived so hard to compete with, the Caledonian Railway, who in 1867 had acquired the canal as a condition of buying the port of Grangemouth Docks. A number of services were maintained until 1881, when the Rock Villa Castle ceased operation and became the last of the all-seasons going passenger steamers to navigate the canal. In the next decade, James Aitken, and after him his son George, ran excursions between Glasgow and Craigmarloch during the summer months on pleasure steamers. The popularity of these cruises reached their peak around 1912, when Aitken and Co. had 3 steamers on the route at one time. Aitken's famous puffers, the Canal Queens, so loved by the people of Glasgow, plied the Forth and Clyde Canal for almost half a century. and were the stuff of legend. Aitken had 5 steamers built in total. 3 Fairy Queens, which ran in succession. The May Queen, which could carry up to 200 passengers. And perhaps that most famous, iconic symbol of good times and affordable luxury. The Gypsy Queen paddle steamer, a floating dance venue which brought excitement and novelty to the canal, the likes of which had never been seen before. The Gypsy Queen was built in Paisley and launched in 1905. She was the largest boat to sail on the canal, cruising every summer for 43 years. Day trippers could escape the hustle and bustle of the city for a short excursion to the countryside at Craigmarloch, where Aitken & Co had built the bungalow tea room on the bank of the canal. Passengers could stop for a meal and relax with refreshments, paddle about in the boating pond, try their hand at mini golf on the putting green, or play in the swings that Aitken had built there. Cruising was so popular that Aitken converted the canal boat, the Meadow Queen, into a large floating tea room to cater to the overflow of passengers. And in the evenings, throughout the 30s, at a time when most Glaswegians were going through their worst economic depression, with severe unemployment and uncertain housing relocation from slums, there was music and dancing and light-hearted shenanigans on board, the Gypsy Queen illuminating the canal bank of every town she passed through, helping people forget their troubles, if even for a short while. But the signs of decline were all around. The system of locks on the Union Canal were filled in and built over at Camelon, the connecting link to Edinburgh now severed. Sadly, as storm clouds gathered over Europe and the dull thundering of the war machine grew nearer, the Gypsy Queen was put into dry dock in 1939, and she never sailed again. And the memories of the revelry of those dancing parties of excursionists stepped their way into the annals of Glasgow folklore. The following years saw a gradual grinding down of canal use altogether. In the name of urban development, parts were filled in to make way for roads, and many of the old wooden bridges replaced with heavy load-bearing steel constructions to cope with the increased traffic. Finally, semi-derelict and being deemed a hazardous place, the canal was closed to navigation on the 1st of January 1963. Weed-ridden, its locks choked with rubbish, and pools of stagnant water, the canal became an illegal tipping ground for domestic and industrial waste, and was an eyesore and a worry to every community it flowed through. But all was not lost. From the 1970s onwards, various projects from canal enthusiasts and community groups began to restore what they could of small sections and the green spaces around its banks. Organisations like the Seagull Trust and Forth Clyde Canal Society headed the main campaign for the canal's restoration, with boat trips, meetings and talks, while all the time lobbying the issue and renewing interest and support from the public. Such enthusiasm encouraged the owners, British Waterways, who took over management from the British Transport Commission when the railways were nationalised, who were granted an award from the National Lottery's Millennium Commission, which allowed them to complete the restoration of all the Scottish lowland canals. The Forth Clyde reopened, restored to its former glory in May 2001. An ingenious engineering solution to the missing locks at Camelon, the Falkirk wheel, part boat lift, part kinetic sculpture, making the junction to the Forth Clyde at the Edinburgh and Glasgow Union Canal. And the passenger boats and navigators have returned, sailing across the central belt of Scotland from the North Sea to the Atlantic Ocean on this historic waterway once again. And the restoration and development of the canal continues. At Lambhill, the derelict stables buildings, once used as horse barracks that drove the swift boat service in the 1830s, are being renovated to be put to community use, providing training and employment opportunities for local residents. Lambhill Stables charity will see the whole site transformed into a productive space and visitor centre, which aims to build on the unique advantages of the area's environmental character and establish the site as an important historical landmark. A community hub, which in turn links to the regeneration of the whole canal corridor. To be enjoyed by many generations to come.
Good friends and companions, come join me in rhyme and raise up your voices in chorus with mine. Let's drink and be merry, good drinks and a refrain, for we may and might never all meet here again. So here's a health to the company and unto my love. Let's drink and be merry all out of one glass. Let's drink and be merry, good drinks and a refrain, for we may and might never all meet here again. Here's a health to the wee lass that I love so well, for style and for beauty there none can excel. She smiles on my countenance as she sits on my knee, and there is no one I've met here as happy as he. So here's a health to the company and unto my love. Let's drink and be merry all out of one glass. Let's drink and be merry, good drinks and a refrain, for we may and might never all meet here again. Our ship lies in harbour, she is ready to dock. I wish her good landings without any shock, and if ever I meet you by land or by sea, I will always remember your kind words to me. So here's a health to the company and unto my love. Let's drink and be merry all out of one glass. Let's drink and be merry, good drinks and a refrain, for we may and might never all meet here again.
Tosso Loch and the surrounding wetlands are perhaps one of the best known wildlife habitats existing on the peripheral of any city in Scotland. These wetland communities are the largest remaining areas of their type within Glasgow. The fens and loch support a great diversity of plants, including a number of nationally scarce and threatened species. Historically, these fens and bogs formed part of an extensive system of lochs and marshes that ran across the west central belt of the Scottish lowlands. Currently at 78 acres in size and 50 metres above sea level, the loch was originally thought to occupy a natural basin of water created by a melting glacier. It's now generally believed that mining subsidence was the more probable cause for the formation of the permanent water body we see today. Being so close to the city, the marsh is particularly vulnerable from industrial and residential development. In the mid-19th century, the water level was so severely affected by drainage that the loch was reported to run dry in the summer. Since the 1960s, a series of drainage ditches have been dug to alleviate flooding on the Balmore Road and the build-up of silt blocking water outlets from Lambhill Cemetery complex nearby. Various attempts have been made to control the water level but as yet have been unsuccessful. The spill-off from the road and drainage from the cemetery has had the effect of turning the marsh into a sump. The excess water brings with it extra nutrients, which can sway the balance of the local ecosystem, encouraging the spread of one plant species over another. The invasive reed sweetgrass is predominant throughout the area, and this plant can smother and displace other less vigorous vegetation that is native to the area. Some marshland species such as grass of Parnassus and adder's tongue fern, bog asphodel, the carnivorous bladderwort, marshwort and creeping willow have been previously recorded at the site but have now disappeared. The loch contains a central mire of Birch Island which supports an important number of sphagnum species. A raised bog formation which is in the early stages of forming peat. Many of the species which are firmly established within the reserve have been deliberately introduced, but some have come accidentally from the adjacent canal. Other species, such as cursed buttercup, entered the marsh due to material being brought in to level up the ground for a cottage that once stood within the reserve. It also holds tufted loosestrife, which is listed in the Scarce Plant Atlas. The reed beds are home to many species of invertebrates, including aquatic beetles and dragonflies. Posso Marsh is the most northwesterly known location for the swan mussel, which has been recorded at only 5 sites in Scotland during the last century. The site provides nesting cover and winter grounds for a wide diversity of bird species. A variety of ducks and swans, including the rarer whooper swan, can be seen in its waters. You may catch a glimpse of ospreys resting at the loch on their annual return to the Highland Eyries at Loch Garten and elsewhere. Wagtails, warblers and swallows fly around the marsh before setting in the reeds and willows for cover. A total of 145 species of birds have been recorded, with up to 22 species breeding, including birds such as reed bunting and water rail, which are in decline nationally. These areas are a valuable habitat for many mammals, including mink, otters, the water vole and roe deer, which are being seen in increasing numbers on the marsh each year. Ironically, it is the industrialisation of the local boundary of the loch that has protected and preserved it, and provided safe access for people to course its terrain.
The original path was for the linesmen to walk the line, check the lines. During the storms and that, fuses would blow and they would have to walk the line to see what caused the fuse to blow, you know. It might be a kid throwing a wire up, or it might be a bird kissing another bird sort of thing. You know. The trees down, any trees that are growing get cut down. But then the Royal Bank of Scotland took over and they maintained it for a while, you know, made it a proper path.
In 1954, the marsh was first notified as a site of special scientific interest, and in 1982 was acquired as a gift by the Scottish Wildlife Trust, who carried out improvements, including the building of a circular walkway with access from the canal towpath. It was the first nature reserve in Glasgow to be completely accessible to the disabled. Along the path at the northern end of the loch sits the monument for the high Posso meteorite, which fell in a nearby stone quarry in 1804. The Posso Loch and surrounding wetlands have inspired many natural historians to take up their field of study. For the people of Lambhill, the loch draws the barrier between wild nature and urban civilization, a place holding 1,000 tales of man and the natural world blending together.